Welcome to our series of mental health moments and conversations. We are doing these to offer different perspectives, often from caregivers, and to offer support so that those with similar experiences don't feel alone. Some examples in this series may be close to your experience, and some may offer a new perspective. We want to show unique situations while also highlighting that mental health and struggles we face have commonalities across demographics. We hope this series helps to shed some light on mental health and to help others know that you aren't alone. At times, we will bring in clinicians to offer their professional advice, but more often this series will highlight someone with lived experience, offering their insights and with the goal to raise awareness and provide support. We appreciate you watching, and remember, you are not alone. Hi everyone, and welcome to our Mental Health Moments series. This is brought to you by the Johnson Depression Center, part of the Anschutz Medical Campus and the Department of Psychiatry. Today we're going to be talking about suicide awareness. We're going to be speaking with Lydia McKee, who is a survivor of suicide loss, and really discussing what we can do to have more awareness and understanding about this complex topic. So Lydia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Alex, for having me. I'm here today in honor of my son Patrick, who died in 2004 by suicide. I think it's really important to open up the conversation around suicide and mental health issues, because then we can decrease the stigma and the shame that is so much surrounds it. And I feel like that shame is part of what causes people to die by suicide. I think mental health is part of physical health, and it's high time we start to treat it that way. And so society needs to really change the way they view mental health and give it the same respect that they do physical health, because they really are one and the same.
Absolutely, yeah. I think, to your point there, with mental health, with suicide, we're seeing these increase in rates and statistics. Nationally, we're obviously seeing a big concern. Locally in Colorado, we're seeing this increase, and we know that this isn't going away. I know your son died 18 years ago, but what are other things that really kind of stick out to you of important for people to know about your experience?
Well, I think one of the things is that we were a very traditional home. I was a stay-at-home mother. My husband worked long hours, but he didn't travel a lot. Those kids were absolutely our priority. There was just nothing else that was that important to us. As a mom, I tried to put the boys in sports, activities. Patrick's brother, Austin, was 2 years older than Patrick, and they were always very close as kids, playing together and had a lot of the same friends. And I tended to put them in some of the same sports. In retrospect, I think that was a big mistake. So one of the things I want to tell parents are to really look at your children individually and make sure you're doing what is right for that particular child.
Looking at each kid individually, their unique attributes, who they are, kind of what they like to do. That was something that you really took away from that experience.
Yes, it was. And I think that you need to make sure you put your children in things they can be successful in and make them feel good about who they are.
Yeah.
And, so for Patrick, I think that was something that played into him not feeling good about himself. Academically, Pat was never interested, in school, in grades, or I wouldn't say he's not interested in grades, but he had a hard time in school. So I had him tutored. He had great friends that were always helping him out with, English and whatever he needed.
Yeah.
But in my mind, I thought Pat needed to go to college. And so we started looking for colleges, and that's when I noticed him getting really anxious, because we were struggling finding a place he could go to, because he was pretty much a C student. Mm-hmm. All his friends had done very well in school and had all kinds of choices, and we didn't. Mm-hmm. And so that was when I started to see some change in the way Patrick's personality was.
It's very easy as parents to get very wrapped up in all the chaos that parenting is and all the things that are going on in your life. And so it's very easy to kind of go with the flow or do things in a certain way because that's how everybody's doing it and that's the way things go. So you mentioned, you noticed some anxiety. Were there any other kind of risk factors or kind of warning signs that stand out to you?
Well, I think he was getting very irritable, which I didn't realize with depression. That is one of the key signs with children is irritability. And we were arguing a lot. Yeah, and I think that parents need to understand that teenagers themselves are a high risk for suicide because they have very poor executive skills. They tend to be impulsive. They tend to think black and white. I think that teenagers really don't understand the finality of the act of suicide. I really don't think they really get that in their head.
Right.
And especially male teenagers, because the feeling that you're not in control and that something's not right mentally is shameful. And they don't know what to do with that feeling of I'm weak. I can't do this on my own. So rather than ask for help, I think that they can just start to go down the tube.
Yeah.
And when Patrick went off to college, unfortunately, the fact that he wasn't with his friends and his family, he became very depressed. And a friend had the courage to go and talk to some of his teachers and said, "Look, I'm concerned about Patrick."
Yeah.
So in the meantime, he was harming himself, and he could have harmed other people. They did not go get an evaluation on him. Right. And so then my son, became so clinically depressed that by the time he had come home he'd been away for 3 months, and by the time he came home, he was not in a good state. And I knew something was really wrong, and I thought that I was going to be able to talk to him about what was going on with him. I didn't get the chance because that morning, he took his life. And, from that moment on, the floor from underneath our family was completely kicked out.
What were some of the things that kind of got you through those months, and like how did you cope, and how did you guys make it through that time?
As far as coping, well, it was like a bomb went off, and I just had, no idea how I was going to do this. Thank God I have a pretty good body, it turns out. And I'm like, but at the time, grief is just the toughest thing you'll ever go through in your life. And I know there is definitely stages and phases that you go through. You go through all of them back and forth. But, I think that once I started to really realize that grief is a healing process and you just have to lean into it, I used to try to change what happened in my head. I was like, no, what did I do? There was something I kept beating myself up and letting the guilt just take over me, which finally I had to realize that is not your friend. You've got to understand it's okay to feel guilty. You will, and all these emotions are real, and none of them are fun to have, but they all are necessary.
Yeah.
And so when you allow that, the sadness, the guilt in particular, then you can start to say, I need to take hold of this.
I think that's really great advice. That's really, I think, hard, like you said, really difficult for people to do, and yet so probably helpful once you let yourself get to that point.
Yeah, you finally have to surrender.
Yeah.
And just ride the horse the direction it's going.
Yeah.
And once you can accept that, and first you grieve the loss of your child, and then you grieve how they died.
Yeah.
And that's why I think suicidal grief is very complicated.
Absolutely.
And as a relationship, your husband will deal with it differently than a mother. In Austin, from a brother, we all did it in our different ways.
Yeah.
And I think for my husband, the way he coped is he put Patrick's Foundation together. He's just like, what can we do? So he developed that foundation for children in crisis.
Oh, that's great.
And that was his way. And Austin always would get Patrick's friends together.
I like how you bring up, the different coping, like for your husband, your son, and you. Those are all very unique ways to cope, and very cool to kind of hear how you came to those places. Kind of as a last piece to touch on here, coping's one piece, but also thinking about supports or help or resources, that's also very different for people. Some people, really connect with their families, other maybe connect with support groups, others may just, friends, whatever it may look like, or internally, maybe through, music or therapy. But what were some of the things, kind of the takeaways that you can touch on around, resources or support that maybe really helped you?
Well, I think at first, when you're in acute grief, you do get support from your family and friends. That quickly fades as, people start to feel like, well, they're uncomfortable when you're in pain. And I obviously was in so much pain that I'm sure I wasn't a lot of fun to be around. And that was one of those things, again, you want to try to tell yourself to shake it, but you can't, So for me, the parents surviving suicide was the most healing thing for me, because it was a validation of other parents that loved their children, and we all were able to just talk about the stories, and I could see that maybe this wasn't that I was a bad parent. Maybe this was a lot more than that. The coping for me was, I'm a reader, I journaled, I did everything that I could to kind of get my wits about me and try to make sense of this, because I had to. That's just the way I'm going to do it. I'm like, there has to be a reason that this is. And so you just use those tools that individually, what works for you. For me, I'm a reader, I'm a journaler. I like to talk about it, and that's where the group worked, because I felt comfortable in talking about it. I could remove the mask that everything was okay, because the heck, it wasn't okay.
Right.
And so, today, 18 years later, we've come a long way. And we're having a discussion like this, which is all good, because I want people to be able to talk about, suicide.
Right.
I mean, it's important that we can discuss it.
I so appreciate you giving all your insight and advice and your experience around this. Your story and Patrick's story really is going to help a lot of people and get people through some tough times. So I really appreciate you sharing and taking the time to talk with me today.
Well, thank you for having me.